country. Definitely rivals. I was just at UC San Francisco at their huge Brain Performance Center. It doesn't even have the technology that we have here. They want this same technology. You know, I started, I don't know if anybody knows that Dr. Daniel Amen Clinics. He worked closely with me on it too, putting in the top technology, and now it actually has better technology than any of his centers. So it's a great, amazing center here. It's nice to have something local in our community. Because of the restraints on my time, and basically every other week I'm in DC running a bunch of other things, that we really don't advertise it, so you probably haven't heard too much about it, and we kind of keep it a little bit hush just so that we can you know, service the clientele right without having to, you know, rush people through and get too much on it. So we kind of keep it as kind of a little bit of a secret, unfortunate, but now you all know, so you're good.
We're telling everybody.
Yeah, just a few. So again, with this center, we map the brain. So we put on an EEG headset, and it records the electrical activity that's coming off the brain. That's very much like taking what's called an EMG sensor, and I could put on my muscle, and a physical therapist could tell how strong my muscle is by the actual frequencies that, as I flex it, the frequencies go up, and as I relax that muscle, it goes back down. And so we basically are looking for areas of the brain that are stuck in producing high frequency. That those neurons are just firing. It's very much like walking around, you know, with a flexed muscle all the time. The brain needs recovery, just like a muscle does. And what you really want is this flow. You want those neurons to be able to come up in electricity as you need it, and then they need to come down as you need it. So they're very much like shifting gears in a car. You go through each gear as you come, and depending on what you're doing, you should be in the right gear. A lot of athletes always ask us, well, what's the flow state for the brain? And I always tell them, hey, the best gear shifter is the one that's having the flow state. The one that can adapt their brain to what they're doing at that time is the one that's in the flow state, not the one that gets stuck. Unfortunately, most of us, especially in our Western cultures, we tend to get very stuck in the, you know, what's called kind of these betas and high betas, which are more that stress constantly going, and we don't practice being able to come down the right way. This middle one here, alpha, is actually the state of the brain, the frequencies that are associated with blood flow coming to the brain and nourishment to the brain. It's literally the equivalent of recovery to a muscle. So when you go and work out on a muscle and you go to the gym, in the brain, it's like being in these states. These are where we're going all day long. But the recovery period, when you stop working on that muscle and you let blood flow come to it, and it actually grows more tissue, that's when a muscle actually grows, is when it's in recovery mode. When you're actually working out on it, it's actually breaking it down. Well, it's the same thing with the brain. We need to oscillate between this go, 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 with this blood flow coming to it, nutrients coming to the brain, the neurons being nourished at the cell level so that it can actually repair and grow more connections, and actually makes us smarter when we do that. But the problem is when we stay in this, it's again like constantly going, you know, 3 times a day to the gym and working on the exact same muscle over and over and over. And you know, so it's important to have that recovery going back and forth. I'm not going to go a lot into the EEG side. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what we measure. What I want to talk about today is a lot more scalable, because this stuff is not very scalable. This stuff's very expensive. It's difficult to you know, put centers in, get people through. It takes a lot of imaging work and a lot of protocol work and a lot of training. So it's not very accessible to people, even though I tell my wife it is, because she gets mad if I don't do things that way. But the thing that's exciting to me is really looking at the discoveries we've made doing that, and mapping the brain and understanding changes in the brain. And there is not one person that we work with today, even the people that are paying the most and doing the highest end treatment, that we don't work on the nutritional status of the brain as well. And really, when I talk about the nutritional status, I'm talking about cell health. Okay, our bodies are made up of trillions of cells, hundreds of trillions of cells, and hundreds of billions of those cells are in the brain. So everything I'm going to talk about has a lot to do with brain health, but those cells are throughout your whole body. Now realize, all disease is about those cells failing. Okay? When you have heart disease, the cells in your heart are starting to fail and come down and have problems. When you have Alzheimer's, your cells in your hippocampus are starting to decay and it's thinning in your brain. If you have Parkinson's, the cells in your sensory motor strip that control your fine motor movement are starting to decay and have problems. They're decaying faster than the rest of the cells in your body. Okay, so all disease, and especially chronic disease, all the way from cancer to chronic problems like arthritis and stuff like that, is all to do with the cells. So the most important thing we can do is to work on cell health, and there's a few core things that can literally change. We could wipe out 80% of chronic disease, and that includes brain disease, if we really targeted some of these things. So again, your body's made up of trillions of cells. If we took one of those cells or a few of those cells, and we do this, I also own a company called BrainSpan, which is a blood-based lab test, and we do all kinds of lab tests, especially as it relates to the brain. And we take a blood spot, so a little poke, one little blood spot, which really has a tremendous amount of cells within that blood spot, and we actually use a whole process that lances open the cell membrane of that red blood cell. So it's not looking at just the serum, and the plasma that really has a lot of just what you ate yesterday. Think of that as very much like a glucose test. You have to fast. It's really kind of where it is right now, versus like an A1C test, which is really more stable. And the same thing we do is we lance open the actual membrane, which takes about 90 days from the food you eat to get into the membrane. Now it starts coming in right away, but it takes about 90 days to saturate that membrane with the food you eat. This entire membrane is made up of what's called a fatty acid bilayer, or phospholipid bilayer. That phospholipid bilayer is made up of what you eat. Okay? So everything, you've heard so many times people talk about what you are what you eat. Your cells are what you eat. That whole membrane is directly related to what you eat. If you have certain types of food and a lot of processed foods, it starts putting a lot of that inside that membrane. And I'll show you how it starts breaking down the cell. When you have good food, especially things like omega-3s, when you balance your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio and stuff in it, you actually start to, these little orange ones are actually omega-3s in there, and they actually provide little gateways that allow nutrition to get in. So the biggest thing we want to do is that when we work on that cell membrane, which is really the only thing we have control over, without getting into a lot of epigenetics and changing, which you can do and you can actually do through changing the membrane. But we have direct control in a short period of time over changing that membrane. We can change all the cells in our body in 90 days. 90 days and the whole cell's renewed. Now we have to maintain that over a time to get all the health benefits of it, but we can at least get it there within 90 days. And so again, if we change the fatty acids in there, we make the membrane healthy. I'm going to show you how we can make the cell very healthy. The nucleus, the mitochondria, which provides the energy in the cell, becomes extremely healthy too. So again, what I want to talk about is the omega-3s there in the orange. Omega-3s, notice the typical fatty acids there kind of have just these two kind of points that come down, where an omega-3 has this little crooked tail that kind of comes out. What that does is it actually, basically, if I was stacked next to someone and we were all stacked real close, that would be like me going like this, okay? And when I did this, that makes a little bit of room between it. And what's called is cell fluidity, which makes the cell very flexible, okay? Because it's not so jam-packed. The opposite of that is rigidity, okay? Which is very packed together and it can't move very well. We want to have a level of cell fluidity because it adds perforations through the cell. And there's through that cell wall is how the cell actually takes the nourishment from vitamins you take, from foods you eat, from all the minerals and things like that, and it actually goes through that cell wall, but it can only go through that cell wall if you have enough omega-3s, those little gateways. Okay, now the omega-3s only come by fish, okay? That's the only way you can really get omega-3s are through fish. Now there's an omega-3 called ALA, which is from plants. Okay, but that has to convert to DHA to get in your cells. You can't have ALA in your cells. So about 1 to 5% of that converts to DHA. So that's why, to get about 2 ounces of fish, you would have to eat about 4 pounds of flaxseed to get that. Okay, so don't let the vegans and stuff. They're great on their diets on the omega-6s. They lower it and everything, and they really don't need as many omega-3s. Because they don't have as many omega-6s, so they're good that way. But it's very, very difficult to get enough omega-3s through eating a plant-based diet. Okay, so you need, they should at least be taking fish oil. The great thing about fish oil is not synthetic. Okay, fish oil is actually fish oil. It's real fish oil that's put in a capsule. So you're actually getting the benefit of that fish with that. We've had, this test was on the Dr. Oz show about a year ago, and Dr. Oz's wife is a vegan and vegetarian, I think she's vegan or vegetarian, I'm not sure which one. But again, we looked at her and she has the most strict diet, a professional chef that makes things for her every meal and all this stuff, and she was still extremely low on the omega-3s in there, and she didn't even realize that. So you can't really get that without having either fish oil or eating a good amount of fish. And typically what we do is with our blood tests is we can measure how much, what percentage of those omega-3s are compared to the other fatty acids in there. And you typically want greater than about 8%, okay? So 8 to 10%. So think about 1 out of 10 of those phospholipids should be omega-3s. And that gives enough permeation of that cell to absorb the diet and the nutrition you want. And that's why I think it's so important, and it's really, you know, I think as a company, you know, Optavia has a huge ability to expand with this is on their omega-3s. They know it's important, that's why they carry it. It's one of the few supplements they carry. But to get everybody on an omega-3 supplement right when they start on their other food allows us to get all the benefit of all those nutrients. In the new Optavia line, everything's fortified with all these minerals, amazing minerals, things like magnesium and stuff that gets into the cell, helps the mitochondria, you know, selenium, all these things that are in there, but they won't get into the cell unless they're taking the omega-3s. Okay? You shouldn't really start a nutrition program without taking the omega-3s because you're not going to get the benefit out of it. You'll get some benefit, but not a lot. Okay? So start with that. So basically your food, again, has to go through that cell wall, and it's only going to go through where those omega-3s. We kind of talked about that already. The next thing is that it improves, not only does it help get the food and the nutrients into the cell, but it also helps the cell-to-cell signaling that's taking place inside the cell. That neurotransmitter that starts inside the cell has to go through that membrane to hit to the next cell. And you've all seen the neurons and the dendrites that connect, and they have to send chemical messengers or electrical messengers, which then trigger chemical messengers that have to go through the cell wall. Okay, so if you don't have enough perforation, you're actually stopping the majority of those neurotransmitters. Now this is where so many people are going to drugs, whether it be stimulant medication for attention deficit. You get this right, you bring up that cell-to-cell signaling, that dopamine release almost as much as a medication would. You know, so many people go, I think it's like 1 in 4 people are on SSRIs or antidepressant or anxiety medications. Again, all we're trying to do is increase serotonin and different things with these different neurotransmitters that actually stop the anxiety. There's you know, inhibitory neurotransmitters that slow things down. It's kind of like the brakes. And there's excitatory neurotransmitters that are kind of like the gas. You need this balance of brake and gas. I always tell people that, you know, when you don't have enough cell signaling here, you're not producing enough serotonin, your anxiety you get is like going down the freeway at 60 miles an hour. That should not be a problem for anybody. But you do 60 miles an hour without brakes, now you should have anxiety. It becomes a problem, right?
It's a problem.
Right, right. So that's what that is. And instead of going and getting on these SSRIs and stuff, which don't help as much, because even the SSRI, it's going to block. It's going to make this produce more, but it's still blocking. It's still like having a fence up and a border up. So we want to be able to get that through. So it increases the cell-to-cell signaling. Literally, when you get this right, it's almost the same as medication, except it's throughout all cells of your body. Your whole peripheral nervous system, central nervous system, all works so much better. Okay? We can measure this. This is one of our lab tests that we do, where we actually measure to see where someone is. I'm telling you, this is the most important test. We have this now in 500 doctors' offices, and by far the consensus is this is more important than any cholesterol test. This is more important than anything, because if you get this right, it actually regulates the triglycerides, regulates the cholesterol, regulates a lot of that stuff. It really helps get it in and out of the cell, and the cells start working correctly. And the best thing is, you know, when, you know, think of this, omega-3s, as kind of the gateway to make Optavia work better, because you have all the nutrients and everything that's there, and then when you use this, you actually get more benefit from that, which is huge. And that's why, again, I think everybody, and I think Rick and Louisa definitely agree, to put a lot of people on the omega-3s right out of the box with this. It's so important. So research, these are all peer-reviewed research. These are not little anecdotal studies. These are things like Plus One, JAMA neurology studies that have actually used our test, that we have 47% lower risk of dementia. Now that's a JAMA neurology peer-reviewed study. If anybody knows about those, they don't say things like 47% lower risk of dementia. I mean, that's amazing. That means it was probably 99%, but they just watered it down because they didn't want it to look too overrated. But 47% lower risk of dementia, improved short-term memory, better focus and learning at schools, all these things. That's a 500 kid Oxford study. Improved mood and lower anxiety. And then the other side of it is ADHD symptoms, slower learning. So much of attention deficit, distractibility, learning disorders are those cells in the brain not working, not communicating. The cell-to-cell signaling is not working as well, and it causes problems when we do that. I was at Starbucks probably 4 or 5 months ago, and was behind these two young moms, and they're talking about their kids, how they have so much ADHD, and it's going back and forth. And then when they got up, they said, "Okay, yeah, Johnny, yes, you can have the cake pop and the Frappuccino before you go to school." That was their morning breakfast, and they're wondering why this is happening, and it's just part of our culture. So another couple things is super, super important. Anybody that is gonna get pregnant, anybody is pregnant, especially during the 3rd trimester, I mean, this is when the baby's brain is being formed. And about 70 to 80% of the neurons that you actually have during that time, you grow during that time, stay with you your whole life, okay? So you have about 30% that you can, eat a bunch of fish and do things and keep regenerating and things like that. But the huge amount that are there continue through, okay? And so they've actually shown in rat studies, when they take rats and feed them high DHA, the mothers that are pregnant, and then as soon as they're born, they give them both groups the same diet, no DHA, and they have these rats there. You can accelerate their aging through DNA, and the ones that were fed the high DHA while their mother was pregnant actually outlive the others by about 20%. Okay, and so it's huge. Even if they don't pick up the habits later on, it's also increases IQ scores, significantly IQ scores, because there's more connections. The more connections you have, you actually have less stress and less anxiety. Okay? The weaker your brain is, when I'm talking about connections between those, the more stress from outside weighs, and it's hard to actually be resilient towards that. It's no different than a muscle. I would have less stress on my muscle doing things if my muscles are strong and I'm picking them up and I don't have as much stress. It seems very easy. When things are very difficult, because if I have less muscle activity, it puts more stress on my body. And it's the same way with the brain. They've shown that the brain, when it has less connections, will have more stress. And it's real interesting that they also did a study with the exact same diets that show mothers that have a lot of stress during pregnancy actually have babies with thinner connections. Yeah. So and they claim anxiety is genetic. Well, it's either genetic or maybe there's a thing called epigenetics, where if the mother is stressed, it can actually start flipping some of the DNA on to that baby to where it can pass it through, and so it's really, really important. Anybody better brain function and motor function as well. This is also, again, we talked a little bit about this, proves memory at school, learning. Every kid should be on high enough. Now the problem is that there is about 80% of the products out there are rancid oil, okay? The supplement business is the most unregulated business there is probably in the world. And of the supplement business, omega-3s are the most produced and probably the worst regulated there is. So it's a terrible, terrible industry, unfortunately. And that's why typically, there's just so much out there. You get such a wide range of, you go to Costco, you can get things for so cheap, and other things are more expensive and stuff too. It really comes down to how they handle it, the quality, how long they keep it in storage. how much preservatives they're putting in there and antioxidants to stabilize. There's so many things, and the problem is in the gel caps, typically, you don't know the range of those. You burp the taste of fish later on. You shouldn't ever do that. You shouldn't taste the taste of fish. If it is, it's starting to go rancid. You should replace it. But in the gel caps, a lot of times we don't even notice that and stuff with it. So it's so great to get high quality omega-3s. Don't skimp on that. That's one of the things you don't want to skimp on. We've done extensive testing, working directly even with the corporate side of Medifast and Take Shape for Life and stuff, and tested their products, and they're great products. They work well. They get absorbed in the cell. They're very stable, and that has a lot to do because they're not shipped to big box stores and stored in warehouses for 2 years and stuff. Whenever you have direct to consumer, you're going to have a lot less problem because you don't have all the middlemen that have the problems. Yeah.
I want to interrupt your flow,
Yeah.
but can you explain the EPA and the DHA versus just fish oil? Why
Yes,
that
that's a
matters?
great point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you went to Costco and you looked, you will see, you might see 1,000 milligrams of fish oil. Okay, and in 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, most people are told you need to take 1,000 milligrams, so they see 1,000 milligrams of fish oil. Fish oil is made up of multiple things. 1,000 milligrams of fish oil means absolutely nothing. If you take that same box, or the bottle, thank you, and you flipped it around, you would then see maybe 700 milligrams of omega-3s. So then you think, okay, well that's pretty good. But the only omega-3s that really matter in the brain are two called EPA and DHA. Okay? EPA and DHA are the ones you get directly from fish, but it's the main ones that are in there. There's a few other omega-3s that really don't do much, but the main ones are going to be the EPA and DHA. So if you looked at that, it would then say EPA maybe 300 and DHA maybe 200. Okay, so that's 500 milligrams. Don't be fooled by the label that says 1,000 milligrams of fish oil. Okay, look on the back. Look where it says EPA, how much added up to the DHA. You should be taking a minimum of 1,000 milligrams on that. 1,000 milligrams is the bare minimum that people should be getting just from their diet, and that's without all the stress we have and all the toxins we have and the foods we eat and things like that. The best thing obviously is to test the blood, because what is being absorbed by the blood is all that matters. If it's absorbed in the actual cell, you're doing good. I know a lot of people that can take tons of omega-3s and still be low on their testing on it. So you want to have a good quality product, and there's two ways to do it. Just take plenty. I take 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams every single day, not trying to do anything but sustain. And so I think it's the absolute best investment you could possibly do for your brain health. Kids should be on it. Again, you want a high omega-3 index. When we talk about athletes too, there's a study that shows if you have a high enough omega-3 index, your cell fluidity becomes 10 times more resilient to concussion injury. Now, when the neurons are flexible, the concussion occurs when the brain actually rotates and hits in the inside of the skull. Okay? And there's all these bony edges inside the skull that the brain just sits there and goes back and forth. It's called contra-Q injury typically. And it can be just a whiplash. It doesn't even have to be an actual impact. Okay? When that does that, there is all kinds of shearing that happens in the neuronal connections, which are called the dendrites, in that gray matter, okay, which is the outside of the brain. And so that sits and rattles against, it gets torn and stuff, and when those connections tear or shear, break, and sometimes an actual axon can break, that can cause a tremendous amount of post-concussion syndrome, okay, or post-concussive symptoms that can happen afterwards. So and that usually happens when there's what's called cell rigidity. When there's cell rigidity, those neurons are so hard and so stiff that little bits of movement, break it. If I took something, like a hard piece of brittle plastic and barely moved it, it would break, it would shatter. Okay, that's what the neurons do when there's not very much cell fluidity. But if you take a very flexible piece of plastic that has a lot of flexibility and fluidity, which when the cells have enough omega-3s, they flex, you can do all kinds of things with them and they just go right back to where they were. Okay? I mean, there's probably evidence out there that at least in high school and younger, I would probably rather have my kid have a high omega-3 index than wear a helmet playing football. Okay? At least as far as with concussions. Helmet's going to be great for, actual, not to have actual damage to the head and stuff like that, ripping it open and stuff like that. But a helmet doesn't do really anything for concussion because it's the brain rattling. If anything, you're putting a heavier thing on your head, which causes probably more whiplash. So, it's really not going to help. So that's where it's so important. But the studies will show that you, again, 10 times more resilient, but you can also, you don't get the cumulative damage that happens, that little shears in the neurons, and then what happens is the brain doesn't, the problem is, if we hurt our knee, we x-ray it, we do a bunch of things to make sure it's better and healed before we put someone back into a game. With the brain, we don't do that, okay? We just, are your symptoms feeling better? You feel pretty good. Now you gotta realize you have a kid that wants to get back in there, so they're not gonna necessarily always tell you the best symptoms. Right. And so what happens is you go back in there before it's fully healed, and it doesn't fully heal unless there's enough omega-3s either, because omega-3s are the precursor to a substance called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's very much like what human growth hormone is. And when I have an injury to my knee, it swells, then to demobilize me, it sends human growth hormone in there, which repairs all the tissue, then that goes away and the swelling goes down. It's a normal healing process. When I get hit in the head, it again has what's called amplitude asymmetry, which is not the same as swelling, but it basically locks the neurons in place so it can heal. And then it increases this BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which starts healing. But if you don't have enough omega-3s, guess what? You don't produce enough BDNF. And if you don't produce enough BDNF, you wait for a little bit, some of the major symptoms go away, you start engaging in things again, that part doesn't heal. It stays where it is, and the brain adapts and starts using other neural pathways to take over for that and starts getting better at basically hiding your symptoms. And then you have this small weakness. To me, it's no different than if I had a hairline fracture in my arm and I just let it go and I went back into play. Wherever I get hit, if this arm is involved at all, it's going to cause problems, and that's going to be the weak spot that's going to be continue to get injury, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's the same thing in the brain. If you don't have enough connections in that area and the brain just starts using other routes, it's going to be the weak spot, and that's why most of this CTE and things, the decay that the football players are getting are not from one hit. It's from multiple things, all the way from Pee-wee sports, all the way through high school, all these little things that just continue until it finally breaks down. The cells can't sustain it anymore.
Quick question.
Yeah.
On the omega-3, so in your experience of having 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day, where would you buy them from? And can you suggest any makes that are better than others?
I definitely suggest Optavia, right? It's over here, and plus they'll shoot me if I don't.
No, we have a good brand, but there's other places
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, there's, Optavia has a great one. What you want to do is you want to get a higher dose one, because if it's real low dose, you're going to be taking 10 pills to get enough. So Optavia's, I think, is 1,200 milligrams, per dose, which is great. And to take 2,000 to 3,000, you take twice the dose. There's other companies that have it in kind of a liquid format too. That's more like a little bit of a yogurt-based thing that sometimes kids can take a little bit easier. But what you just want to get, you want to get a good brand, mainly a direct brand, either one that's sold directly through a physician that doesn't. You don't want the consumer middleman. That's the problem. Whenever you have a consumer middleman, like a GNC, Costco, Target, all these things, it's sat in storage. They're going, believe me, when they're selling billions of dollars worth each year, every little bit of savings helps. And if you can cut back a little bit on the quality, you think, no one even cares, everybody's just looking at price anyways, you do that, okay? So that's the one area you don't skimp on. You get a good quality product.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, and then, as we get through this too, we talked about 47% lower risk of dementia. A large study published again by Journal of American Medical Association, using our test here, showed people with a higher omega-3 index, so if they have enough omega-3s, 65% slower cellular aging over a 5-year period. Okay? Now, when I talk about cells, I'm usually talking about the brain. You can talk also about the heart, you can talk all about the organ systems, but what most people care about is the skin. And 65% slower aging in skin. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And that's by telomere attrition, which is looking at the actual DNA breakdown. So that's hugely important. A lot of things here too. Improves protein metabolism. So, you know, what is great about what Optavia does is they're actually getting you the right amounts of protein throughout it, but this helps you metabolize that protein so you can get better benefit out of the protein as well. And, you know, it also, you know, improves lean body mass and function, which is exactly what the program's already doing. So that really helps there. We talked a little bit about those neurons and again the dendrites and how they can kind of share and stuff too. I won't talk too much more about that. This is actually a picture of someone that has high omega-3s versus deficient omega-3s, the actual neuron connections. So you can see if this person gets in a concussion or shakes their head a little bit, they've got, if they break off 4 or 5 of those connections, not a big deal. This one right here, you break off 4 or 5 major connections, you're left with less than half of that. You know, and you can't have the electrical activity go across that. So what happens is then it stops producing electricity, the brain starts filtering that in other routes, and if that continues to happen over and over and over, you get large portions of your brain that finally break down. So it's really important to have it, high omega-3. The next thing I want to talk about is, other than omega-3s, the next thing that's so important is the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. This could be more important than everything I just said, okay? Because this is the inflammatory response throughout the whole body, okay? If you have your cells, again, go back to that membrane, those fatty acids going around there, should have equal parts of omega-3s to omega-6s. Omega-6s are very pro-inflammatory, especially one called AA, arachidonic acid. It's very pro-inflammatory. And omega-3s, especially EPA, is very anti-inflammatory. When you have, like, say, a typical Japanese diet is almost balanced of 1-to-1 because they eat so much fish. You know, Mediterranean diet's about 4-to-1 ratio, which is pretty good. The average American diet is anywhere from 25 to 30 to 1, okay? Pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory. Our bodies are meant to have a 1-to-1 ratio, which means when we have outside stress, whether that's emotional stress, whether it's biological stress, you know, I think that's why so many people have gluten intolerances and sensitivities to lactose and all these things, is because those things hit your body, cause a little bit of stress, and the cells are so sensitive that it sits there and launches off this whole cascade of inflammation throughout the body. Well, of course those things are going to bother us when they have that. And a lot of those people have more you know, sensitivity to, you know, gastrointestinal issues, to emotional issues and stuff too, because your cells throughout your whole body are extremely sensitive. I liken it to a hair trigger in a gun of just, I mean, you give a hair trigger of a gun to someone, and just normal playing with it's just going to shoot off that gun, right? Where if it's balanced, it's like you have the inflammation will be there when it's appropriate, when there's a major problem, like we talked about my knee and I damaged it. I want inflammation to come there. That demobilizes me. It's meant. That's part of the healing process. But what I want every time I barely walk on my knee or step down on my knee to be swelling up, you know, and that's what happens to the body when you get that out of whack. We talk a lot with physical medicine and functional medicine doctors about this, because most of low back pain to neck pain to all these nerve pain and everything comes down to this imbalance. When you take things like Tylenol and different pain medications, it actually goes and stops the conversion of omega-6s. That's all it does. So it's trying to do what we should have balanced in the first place. When you have it balanced, you don't get really any effect from those medications because it's already balanced. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just curious about that, because your body produces omega-6s, right?
Yes. Well, no, it doesn't produce omega-6s.
I thought we produced
No, omega-6 is an essential fatty acid, meaning that you'll die if you don't eat them. You don't make them.
Okay, that was what I wanted to ask, because I thought that was, but I know omega-3s is not. So
Right.
I just was curious, if the body's so dependent on that, why don't we?
Exactly. So it is it's both omega-6 and omega-3 are both essential fatty acids. Okay, and that means that the body does not make them. We have to eat them. Okay, we will die if we don't get them. So when we talk about omega-6s, there is a lot of omega-6s that are excellent to our body. The problem is we have such an abundance of them, okay? We have taken now, you know, I always tell you the 3 biggest areas we get omega-6s from is corn, soy, and then in vegetable oils. It is not from, you know, organic soybeans that we're getting all these omega-6s from. It's not from, you know, eating corn on the cob, and it's definitely not from eating vegetables. It's from all the, soy that's put in it's this GMO soy that's in every single thing possible. And the GMO is not necessarily the problem. It's the fact that it's in everything so much. It's just made up for everything that's in there. The cornstarch that's in everything all the way across. The vegetable oils of everything we eat that's made in these vegetable oils. So that is why we're getting so much omega-6s. So now there's so much that, it's an overabundance of it. Yeah, and you can say you can't get an overabundance of things. Well, you can get an overabundance of water. It's called drowning, right? I mean, it's about equal. We are drowning in omega-6s, and that's the problem with it. And that's why I don't necessarily recommend people take omega-6 supplements, because even though they're not bad for you, they're adding to it. If you're at a 1-to-1 ratio and you want to take an omega-6 supplement, that's great. That means you're only getting probably the best omega-6s there is, which is real healthy for you. But if you have a lot of other omega-6s, you don't want to do that because it still ups it, no matter how good it is. Okay. Now, the main one that we measure for is arachidonic acid, which there's a lot of other types of omega-6s as well. But that's the most pro-inflammatory that we find. So again, typical is 24-to-1. Just measured someone the other day, 98-to-1.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Amazing.
Say that again.
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, really, when you look at percentage-wise, 98-to-1 compared to 15-to-1, you're talking about, 1% to 2% difference. I mean, because at some point, it's just statistically doesn't really matter. You're 15-to-1, you are highly sensitive. It's like if you had a gun trigger, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between 98 and 1. They're both sensitive. They're both sending stuff off constantly. So at some point, it just doesn't matter. That's just a real problem because they're not taking enough omega-3s, and they have tremendous amount of omega-6s. Again, we can measure this. Again, the red there, low amounts are high inflammatory response throughout the entire brain and body. Increased pain response. So many people are getting so many muscle aches and pains, arthritis, all this stuff is a pain response are due to the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. Most allergies, immune response, autoimmune disease has to do a lot with an omega-3, omega-6 ratio problem. It's really an inflammatory response. The cells are actually producing certain hormones that cause inflammation, which triggers it. High risk of cancer and disease. There's all kinds of studies that link that. I mean, I think every doctor would agree that the vast majority of all chronic disease is through inflammation. Inflammation's at the core of everything. And so you control, the problem is that we're usually trying to control inflammation by, getting our measurements of our cortisol and things. But those are just inflammation in the moment at what's right now, right? Where when you control it on the fatty acid side, and how do you control it on the fatty acid side? By what you eat. If you eat a balanced meal, you will have balanced omega-3s, or a balanced omega-3 to omega-6. And this is where, with the Optavia, this is specifically why I eat all the time, the Optavia, at least the bars. I mean, the next couple days, I'm going to be going from me to me. I probably won't have any chance to eat. Now I'm going to have all my Optavia in there, and I have measured myself from when I started taking it to the end, and it balances it right out. I mean, and yes, I could stay up all night cooking the perfect things and putting everything in packages and refrigerating and bringing my whole, container with me. That's great. I'm not going to do that. So if I just have that prepackaged, and I don't know who would, maybe my wife, she might do that, but maybe. But so again, so balancing that is huge. You can reduce all kinds of things with that. We talked about most of this stuff too. All the overall inflammatory state, diseases, neck and back pain. Again, lean muscle mass and decreased fat. A lot of times when you have inflammation, that whole system's not working very well. Talked again about how it changes body composition. Again, increases the lean muscle mass, steady from there. It's as effective as pain medication, when you get that balanced right, because it stops the inflammation. Again, overall state, all the triggering of inflammation is controlled from those hormones that are produced directly from that AATP ratio. So getting that equal is great. The last thing I'm going to talk about here, how am I doing on time? Going way over. The last thing I'm going to talk about, because I am going to have to catch a flight, is the what's called palmitic acid. It's another thing we test for in these membranes. This is probably more important than everything I've said. We're not joking with that, but it's extremely important.
You use that one.
I know. I've seen if everybody's awake. Right, exactly. So palmitic acid comes from things, we know that palmitic acid leads, when there's large amounts deposits in the cells, that leads to type 2 diabetes. Okay? It leads to insulin resistance, it leads to leptin resistance, it leads to all these things. So typically doctors have said, we know palmitic acid in the cells is bad for you, a high amount's bad for you, therefore foods with palmitic acid is bad for you. Okay? Now, the problem with that is that 30% of all mother's milk is palmitic acid. Okay, so now we're killing all our babies off. We really felt that way. The majority of all things like coconut oil and coconut palm and stuff, but then when you look at large ecological studies that of populations that eat the majority of that, they're 10 times healthier than us. And so when we look at all those things, they don't make sense. Okay, the reason being is because when you eat coconut oil, which has a decent amount of palmitic acid in it, it actually goes through, now palmitic acid is a saturated fat. Okay, saturated means it's solid at room temperature. Okay, like butter is a saturated fat. Palmitic acid, when you eat that saturated fat, it goes, your body, it actually knows what those cells need to keep that perfect level of cell fluidity. Okay, so it takes that long chain palmitic acid, and it goes through a process called desaturation, which it actually takes the saturated fat and desaturates it if it doesn't need any more saturation. If it needs the saturation because the cells are getting a little bit too loose and there's too much fluidity, it keeps it saturated and puts it in. Okay? So when you do that, you always maintain an optimal fluidity, a cell fluidity of 15 to 21% of that cell maintains palmitic acid. Range between 15 and 21%. Okay, 21% is great. Palmitic acid is actually great for you. It coats your lungs. It's a protectant against other things. They show people with high amounts of palmitic acid that smoke actually do 50% better than people that don't take palmitic acid, the same amount of smoking. So it can help protect us against toxins and stuff too. So it goes through, your body automatically goes through this desaturation process and compensates for it. So you can eat all the palmitic oil you want in coconut oil, and you will not go above 21%. Okay, it'll keep desaturating and get rid of it. Okay? However, when you eat carbohydrates and sugars, it skips that desaturation process because it's not palmitic acid, it's not saturated fat, it's a carb, and it goes and it hits your liver. And the liver says, hey, we don't need this for energy right now. If we're running a marathon, we might burn it off. But we don't need this for energy right now. So it's going to convert it to palmitic acid. But the problem is it skips the desaturation process. So it goes straight to adding it to the cell. And it just keeps adding it to the cell and adding it to the cell and adding it all as a saturated fat, which builds up. That's why glucose from simple sugars is so associated with high amounts is associated with type 2 diabetes. Because the palmitic acid builds up on this side when it goes over 21%. And when that builds up in the cell, the number one thing it does is it stops what's called leptin signaling. Now, leptin signaling is a precursor to insulin signaling, and most people have heard of insulin. But leptin here is the communication between the fat cells in the brain. Okay, so that's what literally sends transfers back and forth to the brain to the fat cells and communicates what the fat cells should do. Okay, and if the leptin signaling is working correctly, the brain says, hey, I just ate, I'm feeling full. Go ahead and flip this over to fat burning mode and increase energy. Okay, which starts burning off fat, and you have more energy, and you feel full. That's great. When leptin signaling is not working, even after you just ate, the brain says, wait, I didn't get the signal, so you're obviously still in starvation mode, so keep feeling hungry, and lower energy, and store fat. So it does all those things. So when you don't address leptin signaling through that, and you have too much palmitic acid, it throws all this whole process off, and then you start getting the obesity, you start getting all the problems that's happening, which then starts shutting down the insulin, And it just causes one thing after another. It's a whole cascade of problems. So that leptin signaling is so important in any type of weight loss program to get rid of the excess carbohydrates. And again, that's what the number one way you do that is by having small amounts of meals, balanced carbohydrates in the first place, and then small meals throughout the day, not these big meals. Because even if you eat a ton of vegetables all at once, if you're sedentary, it's still carbs, it still hits, and it still converts. Not near as much as a Frappuccino, but it still will hit a little bit. So that's another reason why I don't even have to measure this or think about this. When I'm just throughout the day, every 2 hours, to feel a little hungry, grab one of my bars or something with Optavia and take that, I am maintaining a perfect leptin signal. I'm perfect amount of carbs that my body's just digesting throughout the day, and it's not converting it all to this leptin. It's just using it as energy. Okay? And it's already a low amount of carbs, and it's spread out equally throughout the day. And especially when you combine that with fiber and things that are in the Optavias too, it stops a lot of that conversion from happening. The things that don't have any fiber and high sugar convert the most. Okay? That's why we should, you can eat a piece of fruit, has a lot of fiber in it and stuff, and it kind of, it has sugar in it.
Compared to orange juice.
Exactly, compared to orange juice. Right. That's exactly right. So fruit, typically you can't eat too much because you get full. Not saying all fruit is good or anything like that, but typically, even if you're trying to, you're getting full because of the fiber and all this stuff. But you take orange juice, you're taking all the fructose, none of the fiber, or very, very little amount of fiber, and you're just going to get this huge rush. It's just going to hit that liver, flip it over to palmitic acid, and start storing it in the cells, and cause all kinds of problems.
How many bars do you eat a day on average?
I typically go through probably anywhere from 6 to 7.
What?
But I also
That
get
old
up from about 7 o'clock and usually get done at work about 2 a.m. So in that amount of time, when I get hungry at night, from 8 o'clock till 2, I'll have at least 2
or
3, yeah, exactly.
So that's all you eat?
No, I tend to try and get at least one, good meal in a day.
One good pizza.
One good pizza, exactly, exactly. Now I'll try and have a meal. I eat almost every meal I have. With one good meal, I'll have fish and vegetables and stuff with that, salad and things too. So typically one. A lot of times in the morning, I'll go with more of a kind of a protein and veggie type shake or smoothie instead of Optavia, and then take it about 2 hours later. I try and use the Optavia for me just as a maintenance type thing, and really just to that every 2 hours, if I'm eating that, my brain stays going.
It stays good.
It stays great. It's amazing. When I don't, I get these huge lulls in the afternoon, and I'm instantly thinking towards caffeine or something. When I take that, when I'm even all the way throughout the day, I don't even think about caffeine. So. Again, we measure this, proper sensitive to feeling full, increased energy levels, optimal metabolism, normalized leptin and insulin levels. It's really, otherwise it's a high risk of metabolic syndrome and increased storage of body fat, low energy levels. Who wants that?
Yeah.
That's miserable.
So Brian, what kind of food groups produce the omega-6s, like that our culture is eating that?
It's processed foods, a lot of processed foods. It's going to be a lot of vegetable oils are the biggest one. Okay? And everything is cooked in vegetable oils.
Every fast food has tons of
everything, absolutely, absolutely. So and not even fast food. Any restaurant, you go to Mastro's, you get a lot of omega-6s. Everything's cooked in in vegetable oils there too. It's not just processed foods.
Right.
Processed foods usually get the bad rap because it was all trans fats and going over, and most of them have eliminated that now because it's basically on the verge of being outlawed. It's restricted in a lot of states. But yeah.
So we can use coconut oil instead?
Yeah, use coconut oil. I think there's some issues with coconut oil at high heat, that you want to keep it lower heat and stuff. There's I think it's a high oleic oil that's really good. Canola oil is not so bad with it as far as the omega-6s, but most high. There's a couple good ones that just.
How about peanut oil?
I don't know a lot about peanut oil, So I'm not sure on that.
But olive oil, for sure.
Olive oil is very good, absolutely.
And who
Absolutely.
sells the omega-3?
What's that?
Who sells the omega,
You have to-
whatever we need to take?
And you know, just get a good brand. Just get a good brand on. I mean, Louisa can direct you to the best. She knows all of them.
I thought you were taking them with the program, at least I started you that way, the omegas in your program. We'll talk about it. But I
I'm
was,
thinking.
Yeah.
I started you that way, so I
Mhm.
don't know.
I don't know what it is.
So, anyways,
Sound like a coach?
Yeah,
exactly.
I tried to start everybody.
I have a question, do walnuts have omega-3?
Walnuts have some omega-3s. Yeah, it's plant-based again, so it's going to be ALA, which we'll need to convert. And you're going to get about 5% at most. So, yeah, it doesn't do a lot. It does very minimal.
So,
Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I wanted to get my brain checked out, like for a brain checkup,
Mm-hmm.
could I call you and make an appointment and
You
get
can.
a checkup?
You can. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have a card with your hand?
Yes, I do. I have some cards. And, you know, I did bring also Oaks Christian School, who runs the center. I'm the director of the center, and put there. They run all the business side of it, which is great, so I don't have to deal with any of that. But they do in September, for everybody, they actually do 2-for-1 brain maps. So you buy one, you get one free, and they're $9.75, so they can be pretty expensive. So basically you're getting it for $47 if you get one other person to do it with you. They only do that, unfortunately, I was looking at that, I thought, I'll grab some of these, and I looked at it, and it says through September, the month of September. But usually we can get them to push it a little bit. So if anybody is interested in doing that, and you get one other person to do it with you, you do get half off of it, which is the best deal. And we just literally, they're completely booked right now, I mean, over the next couple of days. But what's great is if you pay for it by the end of September, they let you do it anytime, you know, in the near future, the next couple of months. You don't have to actually go in and do it by that time. But, so, good, yes.
Share your omega kit test.
So the omega tick test, yeah, I didn't get a chance to bring some. I was going to bring some.
Okay.
We're literally practically out of them right now. We're in a back order situation. We just had a few people buy a few thousand of them. So this right here, the BrainSpan test, to test for this, is right now we only sell it through doctors. The Cleveland Clinic just picked this up, and so they're actually processing. They'll be processing it within about 30 days. We're switching over. That'll be our new lab. It's going to be the official brain health test of the Cleveland Clinic. But through the Cleveland Clinic and stuff, we can only go through doctors with that. But what I told Rick and Louisa is, you know, through the Brain Performance Center, we have those available too. So if anybody is interested, we sell them to doctors for $79. They typically, you know, sell them to patients for about $199 is kind of the average retail side of that. It also, what's great about the test is it combines the blood spot test that we just went over, but it combines it with a 15-minute online cognitive test. So it actually tests your memory, your processing speed, your sustained attention, and a couple different things with that. And then it will show you how you're comparing on those things compared to a large normative database. Now, this normative database was built by Pfizer with a $30 million grant. Okay, so this is everybody in this normative database is considered neurotypical, which means they've had a full functional MRI, DNA sequencing, EEG brain mapping, and also they've had a full neuropsych battery test. And every age, and by gender, and by years of education and everything. So it's extremely, like, the company usually, it costs over about $100 to just take this test. And we include it with our BrainSpan test. Since I run all the brain health programs for AARP, I did a huge multi-million-dollar deal with AARP with this company. And when I did facilitate that deal, I was able to kind of piggyback a separate deal for our company and get an amazing rate on this included with the thing too. So you get that, you kind of see where you are compared, and what's great is you can see how when you change your fatty acid profile, your actual processing speed changes, your sustained attention, your memory actually increases. You're literally nourishing the hippocampus, which is the part that encodes memories. So if you are a little bit low, you can do the recommended things on it and change
It'll
your
show up.
diet.
I mean, it'll illuminate the
Exactly.
weaknesses.
Exactly. Which is the time to correct it. Yes.
So I'm not sure they understand exactly. You just take a little prick and you're gonna get a full report.
Right.
And it's gonna tell you what your omega-3 level is in your cell membrane, like
ratio.
Brian was.
Then it'll show you ratio, and it'll show you
Between
level of
1 and
palmitic
12.
acid.
1 and 12, right? It
Right.
should be.
Yeah.
Right.
And you will see exactly where you score
Where you
and
need
how
help, what you
deficient
need
or
to do to
how
get that.
much you need.
So,
And then you can
yeah,
up it.
exactly.
So
how
just,
can we
I would-
get 'em?
I'm sure I do.
Well, if you want any of these, I told Rick and Louisa, I'll get them for the same price we sell them to the doctor for $79. So if you want one of these to test, or want a few of them for family members or anything, just maybe talk to Rick and Louisa and kind of get a list of people, and then we can just just
So
I don't know,
we
get a
conduct,
credit card
I'm
number or
sorry, we
something.
conduct the test ourselves?
It's all for you do it yourself. Exactly. You do it yourself. It has a prepaid envelope in it. It goes right to our lab, and then the results will come back, and we can email them to you or go over them with you. I'm really working a lot with Rick and Louisa on getting up to speed on this, to where they can actually go over the reports with people and stuff too, because I think it's so important that what they're doing is changing brain health,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah,
weight.
that's great.
Brian,
Good.
I have a
So
question.
I just wanted to comment that I did the test, Rick and I did it, maybe 2 years ago, and I scored like a 5 out of a 1 to 12, not good, that was very poor.
That was on the intelligence side.
Touche.
So I started using our omegas, I think I did double dose for about 4 months, and I took the test again, and my new score was 10.5. So it really
Wow.
accelerated.
Exactly.
And it worked
There you go.
fast, and it's awesome that you can actually see the measurement, in that cell membrane, so you know, you have a measurement,
Yeah.
and
I
it's
think
so,
that's a good idea.
it's fascinating.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I'm
really-
telling you, it's the number one thing people should be taking. It's the most important test every single person should take. I do it every 3 months.
Yeah.
People probably aren't even aware of it.
No.
Most people.
No.
No.
So it's like it needs
Until
more.
tonight.
How about for
exposure.
kids?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you
I mean,
do
I've
the
got
same
a
thing for kids?
10-month-old daughter, and I poke her about every 3 months.
What is her score? Where does she land?
She was at a 4,
Really?
which is real low, and but then we started adding just a little bit to her bottle, and she's at over 10%.
Wow.
So, I have a question. Is there research about repairing or reversing brain, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?
So what you can do with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is it depends on what stage it's at. But a lot of times nutritionally, once it's already pretty far past, it's hard to just most studies that show that you dose someone up with omega-3s at a late stage, it's not going to help too much because you're saturating the other cells, but it's not going to undo the damage that's done. We work with a lot of Alzheimer's and a lot of Parkinson's and stuff at our Brain Performance Center, and we can actually, what we do is we can place EEG sensors right next to the area that's already had the cell death, and we can start recruiting neurons to actually start taking over function. So it's very much what you would do with physical therapy after a stroke, where you're recruiting other parts of the brain to take over that and retraining. So we've taken many people with Parkinson's that have tremendous tremors and everything. Did we cure their Parkinson's? No, but they have no tremors.
Really?
They
That's great.
They have no
Well,
symptoms.
I think the beauty of this though is if you can actually start on this at any time before you develop anything,
Exactly.
the chances are,
Getting
it
it.
really minimizes the chances of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
dementia or-
Absolutely. I mean, just according to JAMA, 47% risk lower. I would say it's probably a lot higher
Yeah,
because we have over 200 peer-reviewed studies on this test, and they show, I mean, the groups, and these are 10, 15-year studies, and they show the difference between people that get dementia when they have low omega-3 versus the ones that don't. I mean, it's tremendous difference.
Really, that's great.
And all that, because you're nourishing the brain. I mean, the building block of the brain is 60% fatty acids, okay, and the majority of that is DHA. So they're the building block of the brain. And again, you can't get it, your body can't make it. So it's only from what you eat. But again, if you take enough omega-3s, but you have way excess omega-6s, you have more inflammation, and the omega-3s aren't going to help the inflammation side, if you have such an excess. So you got to keep that balanced. A lot of people have bad ratios because they have such low omega-3s. So you bring up the omega-3s, you can balance it to some extent. But if they have a bad diet, they need to correct that as well.
And the test shows that?
Test shows that exact amount. Yeah.
Basic lung disease comes from this inflammation in
Yep.
the body.
That's exactly right.
So,
That's exactly right.
interesting.
And then for weight loss and energy, you get the palmitic acid level 2 with the test,
Mhm.
so you can see where you are. Is your leptin signaling working, and or is it low, which you want to, or too high, which is too high palmitic acid, which ruins the cell-to-cell signaling of that leptin, and and that's why you're maybe always hungry and not getting the results you want with certain areas of pockets of fat loss, because the body's just hanging on to it. So,
Very
Perfect.
interesting.
Wow.
perfect.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you
good.
very
All
much.
right. I appreciate that. That was fun.